Ashgabat exists as a city that has been scrubbed of human life and replaced with the idea of a city. White marble stretches in every direction. Government buildings rise like polished monuments to an audience that never arrives. And the avenues, broad enough to land a commercial aircraft, sit almost entirely empty in the midday sun. This is the capital of Turkmenistan, a nation sitting atop the world's fourth largest natural gas reserves. And what that wealth has purchased here is not prosperity. It has purchased silence. The first thing visitors notice after the marble are the cars. Not their make or their speed, but their color. Every vehicle on the streets of Ashgabat is white. Not predominantly white, not mostly white. White without exception. This is not an accident of local taste or market availability. This is law. President Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, who ruled Turkmenistan for nearly 2 decades before handing power to his son, mandated that official vehicles be white. From there, the logic extended outward the way authoritarian logic always does. Quietly, completely, until customs officials at the border simply stopped allowing black cars into the country at all. The ban widened. Coupes were restricted. Supercars were forbidden. Tinted windows became a bureaucratic offense. Personalized license plates were eliminated. The roads of Ashgabat carry only what the state has decided the roads of Ashgabat are permitted to carry, and the state has decided they should be white. It would be easy to dismiss this as eccentric, as the kind of harmless absurdity that surfaces in isolated regimes and makes for entertaining anecdotes. But the white car decree is not a quirk. It is a demonstration. It is the regime communicating, in the most visible and daily terms possible, that aesthetic control and political control are the same thing, that the authority to decide what color a vehicle may be is the same authority that decides what a citizen may read, say, or believe. The cars are white because the president decided they would be white, and that is the only reason anyone needs. The architecture operates under the same principle. Ashgabat holds the Guinness World Record for the highest concentration of white marble-clad buildings on Earth. The facades are continuous, gleaming, uniform. In the lead-up to the 2017 Asian Indoor and Martial Arts Games, an event chosen specifically to project an image of modernity and international legitimacy, Turkmenistan spent approximately $5 billion constructing and renovating what the government called its White City projects. Stadiums, hotels, public squares, government complexes, all of it rendered in that same immaculate white, all of it built at a scale that suggests a population many times larger than the one actually living here. The Games provided a deadline and a justification. The marble was already coming. The Games simply accelerated the timeline. Walk through those streets today, and the scale of the construction becomes unsettling rather than impressive. The buildings are real. The money spent on them was real. But the city they were designed to perform for is largely absent. Ashgabat's avenues do not bustle. They do not fill with the ordinary friction of urban life. Street vendors, idling traffic, crowds moving between errands. Instead, they sit wide and clean and watched. Cameras are mounted at regular intervals. Police presence is consistent and deliberate. Ordinary citizens are not encouraged to linger. There are accounts of residents being asked to move along, of gatherings being dispersed before they can become anything resembling spontaneous. Even the air conditioning units that once protruded from residential windows were ordered removed in certain areas of the city because they interrupted the visual uniformity of the facade. A city, in the conventional sense, is a place where people accumulate and collide. Ashgabat is a place where the appearance of a city has been constructed and then protected from the people who might compromise it. This is what $5 billion in marble actually buys. Not infrastructure that serves a population, not hospitals or schools, or the kind of quiet municipal investment that makes ordinary lives more bearable. It buys a backdrop. It buys a stage set for a leadership that is primarily concerned with its own reflection, with the image it projects to the small number of foreign delegations and state visitors who pass through under carefully managed conditions. The Guinness record for marble facades is, in this context, not a boast about achievement. It is a record of priorities. It tells you precisely what the state values and what it does not. Because outside the gleaming center, outside the managed corridors where the marble is polished and the white cars move in their prescribed lanes, Turkmenistan is a country where the majority of citizens live in conditions that the gas wealth circulating at the top never reaches. The reserves beneath the Karakum Desert are enormous, enough to make Turkmenistan one of the wealthiest nations on earth per capita in purely theoretical terms. In practice, those reserves have funded palaces and stadiums and a handful of elite families whose vehicles, white and gleaming, move through empty avenues flanked by police motorcycles. The ordinary citizen navigates a parallel Ashgabat, one defined by shortages, surveillance, and the constant awareness that the distance between admiring the marble and criticizing it carries consequences that are not symbolic. The surveillance does not need to be explicit to function. It simply needs to be present enough that people assume it is everywhere, which in Turkmenistan it largely is. Independent media does not exist inside the country. Internet access is tightly controlled and extensively monitored. The act of speaking to a foreign journalist, of passing information to a human rights organization, of documenting what daily life actually looks like behind the marble. These are not protected activities. They are risks. The city's emptiness, then, is not simply architectural. It is behavioral. People have learned that the safest version of themselves is the version that does not linger, does not gather, does not draw attention. The empty avenues are, in part, a product of that lesson being absorbed and acted upon by hundreds of thousands of people every single day. What the regime has built in Ashgabat is a city-scale act of image management, a place designed to be seen from a particular angle under particular conditions and to communicate a particular message. That Turkmenistan is modern, orderly, prosperous, and in control. And it is in control. That much is accurate. The white cars move in their lanes. The marble facades hold their shine. The streets stay empty and clean and watched. The message lands exactly as intended, provided you accept the terms under which it is being delivered. Step outside those terms. Look at the city from the perspective of the people who actually live inside it. And what emerges from all that white marble is not a portrait of prosperity. It is the architecture of fear, built at extraordinary expense, maintained by constant pressure, and gleaming, always gleaming, in the Central Asian sun. Drive north from Ashgabat into the Karakum Desert, and the marble disappears almost immediately. Within an hour the city is gone, replaced by a flatness so total and so uninterrupted that the horizon becomes something abstract, a line your eyes keep reaching for and never finding. The Karakum covers roughly 70% of Turkmenistan's landmass. It is one of the largest sand deserts in the world, and it sits directly above the gas reserves that fund everything the regime builds, displays, and controls. The connection between the emptiness above and the wealth below is not incidental. It is the central fact of this country, and nowhere is that fact made more visible than at a point roughly 260 kilometers north of the capital, where the desert floor opens into a crater of continuous fire that has been burning without interruption for more than 50 years. The Darvaza gas crater exists at the intersection of accident and spectacle. It was not designed. It was not planned. The best available account of its origin places it in the early 1970s, when Soviet drilling teams working the area punctured an underground cavern, causing the ground to collapse and opening a pit approximately 70 meters wide and 30 meters deep. The precise details remain disputed and largely unverifiable. This is Turkmenistan, where the documentary record of inconvenient events tends to be sparse, but the general outline is consistent across sources. The decision to ignite the gas was made on the assumption that the fire would burn itself out within days or weeks. Instead, it burned through every subsequent decade, through the collapse of the Soviet Union, through independence, through one authoritarian presidency, and into the next, and it is burning now. What was meant to be a temporary solution to a geological embarrassment became, entirely by accident, the most recognized image the country has produced. Stand at the crater's edge at night, and what you encounter is genuinely difficult to categorize. The flames are not uniform. They rise in clusters across the pit floor, in patterns that shift with the gas venting beneath, and the heat that rolls upward is physical, pressing against the face and chest, even at a distance of several meters. The surrounding desert is completely dark. There are no other light sources for as far as the eye can reach. The pit simply burns in the middle of nothing, orange and deep red against a black sky, and the sound it produces, a low, constant roar that blends with the wind, makes the experience less like standing near fire and more like standing near something that has no interest in being observed. The isolation amplifies everything. In a city, fire is an emergency or an amenity. Here, surrounded by the Karakum on all sides, it is something older and stranger than either of those categories. The regime understood, eventually, what it had. The crater acquired an informal name that travelled well internationally, the Gateway to Hell, and that name did what official tourism campaigns in Turkmenistan reliably fail to do. It made people want to come. The image circulated. Photographs taken there achieved a kind of viral permanence, appearing in travel publications and documentary footage with a frequency that made Darvaza more globally recognizable than Ashgabat's entire $5 billion marble cityscape. For a state that invests enormously in image projection, this was both useful and slightly discomforting. The crater's fame was genuine, unsanctioned, and owed nothing to official choreography. It emerged from geology and accident, which is to say from the one domain the state does not control. Access to the site is managed accordingly. Tourism in Turkmenistan operates within channels that the government frames and monitors. Visitors travel in organized groups, with registered guides, on routes that the state permits. Independent movement through the Karakum is not encouraged. The crater itself has been given a formal designation, the Shining of Karakum, by presidential decree, a renaming that attempted to fold the site into the regime's vocabulary of grandeur, while quietly retiring the international nickname that the government found too evocative of something it preferred not to invite. The rename did not take. Outside Turkmenistan, it remains the gateway to hell. Inside the country, people use whatever name involves the least complication. Recent accounts from the site note that the flames appear noticeably dimmer than in earlier years. Whether this reflects natural depletion of the gas pocket below, seasonal variation, or some combination of factors is not definitively established. What is clear is that the fire is not what it was, and that the diminishing spectacle carries a particular irony for a state that has leaned on the crater's image while doing almost nothing to explain or study it publicly. The government's stated position on the crater has shifted in recent years toward action. President Serdar Berdimuhamedov, who inherited the presidency from his father in 2022, has made public statements calling for the crater to be sealed, citing environmental damage and potential health risks from the ongoing combustion. These statements have been made more than once. No concrete action has followed any of them. The crater continues to burn, as it has for every decade since the drilling teams packed up and left a smouldering hole in the desert behind them. The gap between official declaration and material reality is, in Turkmenistan, not a contradiction to be resolved. It is a governing style. What the Darvaza crater ultimately represents is something the regime did not intend to create and cannot quite control. A monument to the gap between what lies beneath this country and what rises above it. The gas burns because the infrastructure installed to capture it failed. The wealth burns because the systems designed to distribute it were never oriented in that direction. The crater is geological. It is also, in its way, perfectly legible as a portrait of everything built on top of it. Every autumn, when the cotton bolls open across Turkmenistan's fields, a mobilization begins that the government does not advertise, and the international community largely fails to interrupt. Teachers leave their classrooms, doctors leave their clinics, Librarians, civil servants, soldiers, university lecturers, the entire architecture of the public sector is redirected, by administrative order, toward the harvest. The fields are not staffed by agricultural workers. They are staffed by the professional class of a country that has, in effect, decided that the distinction between a physician and a field labourer is a bureaucratic detail the state can dissolve whenever production targets require it. The quotas are not symbolic. Each mobilized worker is expected to pick between 20 and 25 kilograms of cotton per day, by hand, in temperatures that routinely exceed 40 degrees Celsius during the early harvest weeks. The heat in the Karakum Basin is not the dry, navigable heat of a warm afternoon. It is a sustained physical weight that accumulates through the day and does not release in the evening. Working in it for hours at a sustained pace, bent over low-growing plants, produces a kind of exhaustion that is cumulative and slow to recover from. The workers doing this are not trained for it. Many are middle-aged. Some are elderly. None of them chose to be there, in any meaningful sense of that word. Refusal is not a protected option. Workers who decline to participate face dismissal, demotion, or formal sanctions applied through their employing institution. The threat is not abstract. In a country where public sector employment represents one of the few stable pathways to income, and where private enterprise operates under conditions of near-total state surveillance, losing a government position is not an inconvenience. It is closer to a sentence. The system understands this, and it relies on it. The coercion does not need to be loudly expressed, because the consequences of non-compliance are already well understood by everyone the order reaches. The official production target is approximately 1.25 million tons of cotton harvested annually from around 580,000 hectares. Turkmenistan's government presents this figure as evidence of agricultural vitality. What it does not present is the mechanism by which that figure is pursued. Despite periodic official claims about mechanization and modernization, the harvest remains overwhelmingly manual. The machinery exists in some capacity. The quotas exist in practice. And because the quotas must be met, and because meeting them manually requires more labor than is voluntarily available, the mobilization system fills the gap, not as an emergency measure, but as a structural component of how the harvest functions year after year. There is a secondary extortion layered beneath the primary coercion. Workers who cannot physically fulfill their daily quota, or who are unable to attend the fields for legitimate reasons, often pay out of pocket for replacement pickers. The money flows informally, through arrangements that the state neither acknowledges nor prevents, because the system benefits from the pressure these arrangements create. The quota must be met. If you cannot meet it personally, you bear the cost of ensuring it is met by someone else. The financial burden falls on the individual regardless. The state collects both the labor and, indirectly, the cash that labor shortfalls generate. In 2024, reports emerged of limited exemptions being granted to some doctors and teachers in certain regions. A narrow acknowledgement, perhaps, that extracting medical personnel from hospitals during a harvest season creates problems the state would prefer not to publicize. These exemptions, where they existed, were partial and inconsistent. The overall system did not change. Child labor has been documented at the margins of the harvest, reported by monitoring organizations operating under significant access restrictions, because Turkmenistan does not welcome independent observation of its fields, any more than it welcomes independent observation of anything else. The witnesses who carry this information out of the country do so at personal risk, and the information they carry is frequently dismissed or delayed by the international bodies positioned to act on it. This is the country beneath the marble, the white boulevards of Ashgabat, the crater burning in the Karakum, the presidential decrees about car colors and architectural standards. All of it rests on a population that has been systematically denied the mechanisms by which people in other countries register dissent, seek accountability, or simply describe what they see. Independent media do not operate inside Turkmenistan. Internet access is filtered and monitored to a degree that places the country among the most digitally isolated on the planet. Satellite dishes were banned from residential buildings under earlier presidential decrees. What citizens can read, watch, and say is curated by the same state that sends their doctors to pick cotton. Critics who find ways to speak face consequences that extend beyond the country's borders. Bloggers and activists in exile, in Germany, in Turkey, in Russia, in various cities where Turkmen diaspora communities have settled, report harassment by individuals believed to act on behalf of the Turkmen government. Family members remaining inside the country are contacted, pressured, or detained as leverage. Travel bans are applied not only to the dissident, but to their relatives, closing even the possibility of reunion as a form of punishment. The message the state transmits through these actions is not subtle. It states plainly that leaving Turkmenistan does not constitute escape. The architecture of control follows people into exile the way it follows them into the cotton fields. Not because the state is omnipotent, but because it is persistent, and persistence in the service of fear is often sufficient. Dissidents who speak publicly about conditions inside the country do so, knowing that their words will likely change nothing in the near term, and that the personal cost of speaking may be paid by people they left behind. Some speak anyway. Their accounts are consistent with one another, and with the documentary record assembled by human rights organizations that have spent years attempting to verify what the government spends equivalent energy denying. The picture that emerges from these accounts is not of a country undergoing difficult transition or struggling with the inherited problems of post-Soviet governance. It is of a system that functions as designed, one that has chosen, at each available decision point, to extend and deepen its control rather than relax it. Beneath the marble is fear. Beneath the fire is poverty. Beneath the spectacle of a president renaming days of the week and banning black cars and erecting golden statues that rotate to face the sun, there is a population of roughly 6 million people who did not author any of these arrangements and cannot legally object to them. The absurdity that makes Turkmenistan legible as a story to the outside world, the gold, the decrees, the empty avenues, the crater rebranded by presidential nomenclature, is not incidental to the repression. It is the surface the repression hides behind. Spectacle, deployed at sufficient scale, creates the impression that what you are observing is theatre. The people inside the theatre do not experience it that way. None of this is likely to change soon. The gas reserves that fund the monuments also fund the security apparatus that enforces the silence. The sun has inherited the father's system intact, with no visible inclination to revise it. The cotton harvest will mobilize the public sector again when the bowls open next autumn, as it has every autumn before it, and the year before that, in fields that receive no coverage and generate no consequences for the state that organizes them. The question that Turkmenistan ultimately poses is not about architecture or geology or the peculiarities of authoritarian decree. It is simpler and harder than any of those. It is whether the people who fill the marble city's invisible population, who bend over cotton plants in 40-degree heat, who send money across borders so someone else can fill their quota, who watch their government from exile and cannot go home, whether those people are remembered when the spectacle is what gets filmed. They are the country. The rest is decoration.